Coming to you live from the District of Columbia, it's Pedalshift Live. Thank you for joining me, the one person who's in the room right now. Very appreciative for your presence. It may actually be me as I monitor the room. A quick little bit of overview for those of you who are new to the live show. We've done one already, and it was a blast and a lot of fun. Now we're starting to get some folks in the room. Hello, Vince LaGreco, friend of the show. This is going to be an attempt to do yet another episode of the pod. We're going to do it live. Obviously, there's the visual component here. We've got a few things different with this one. I've upped the game. First of all, the lighting is a little bit less glary. Obviously, the location is different. We're here in the District of Columbia with, paradoxically, in the city, have way worse Wi-Fi than I do back in the cabin in West Virginia. So we'll just kind of have to see how all of this goes. I don't know if the signal comes through as well on your end. For YouTube, always feel free to hit refresh. If you are currently on pedalshift.net/live, you will not have the ability to rock the live chat. If you want to rock the live chat, you actually want to go to the YouTube page, and there is a whole live chat box there. That was plenty of fun, lots of excitement the last time we went around. So go ahead and click on through there if you are interested in doing that. In fact, I'm going to do the same thing here as I monitor things, just to make sure that things are going through. This is a bit of the pre-show ramble. We did it last time. A little light banter, a little ask me anything kind of a thing. If you're in the chat room, you can always kind of throw some things my direction as well. This episode, I'm also going to try to actually address you a little bit more directly. I have the camera in a place that actually works a little bit better for me. I am, from time to time, going to be looking over here. So if I'm not engaging you directly, you, the viewer, I'm actually looking at the show notes. Just to be able to do. I'm curious as we get the kind of the folks in the room and the show rolling. Let me know where you're from. Paul Culbertson, boom! Didn't even have to say it. Paul from Bend, Oregon. Thank you for joining, Paul. Glad to have you in here. Anybody else, feel free to chime in as well. I will be able to kind of see the chat box from time to time. It pops up in my camera. Pops up down here as well. It's a little bit of the sausage making that I'm sure YouTube folks don't want you to do. Vince, of course, is from Valley Forge, PA. Thanks for coming in from there. I'm curious if we're going to have our friend from Australia. Well, he was our distance winner last time. We'll have to see if he's in the house again. Europe, I'm very sorry you're probably watching this on replay because you are all asleep, and you should be. You should not wake up for this nonsense. This is probably not worth it. But on this episode, we are going to, as I talked about, we're going to be talking about, let's see, number one, we're going to do this in order. Number one is the journal, and the journal is where, of course, we talk about tours, my tour, your tours, etc. This episode is going to be another reveal. I did that also in the last episode. I revealed the last live episode, I should say. I did the reveal for the Washington State tour, the Olympic Peninsula tour. This one, it's a new one to me. I think I put out a few hints out there in social media. I think a few people had some guesses. Gonna have to wait for it. That'll be part of the actual podcast recording part of things. So also on this episode, we're going to be doing, my God, a live cooking demo. If you saw any of the promos, you saw me playing with fire. So we're going to do it again because I have flaming hot takes. Hold on. Flaming hot takes. Whoa! Flaming hot takes. That's probably illegal. We'll be firing that up. I am in a safe kitchen with actual ventilation, which is good. And we'll be doing one of my favorite campfire meals, campsite meals, one that I actually intend to have tomorrow as well. Today in the district, absolutely beautiful weather. We've had the coldest March, the coldest start to April, and I'm so excited that today we actually got into the 70s Fahrenheit. It's camping weather, basically. So tomorrow my intention is to go out, and I'm so uncreative. I am going to be making the same meal that I'm going to be making tonight because I haven't had dinner yet, so I'm going to eat this. I'm going to make the same meal for myself tomorrow night as well. So it's a carb fest, which I normally don't engage in, but we'll have it 2 nights in a row. So it's kind of exciting. So those are the two big things that we're going to be talking about. I'll talk a little bit about the CNO trip that'll be tomorrow, probably more anecdotally, but that'll be basically the podcast. My hope is also that tomorrow for that ride that I'll do some recording. So parts of this live show, plus that, I hope will be part of episode number 114 coming out a week from today. Hope you had a chance to listen to episode 113 that went out at 7 a.m. this morning. That was the penultimate version of the beginner series with James in New York, and we talked about, we talked about fundraising if you've got a charitable cause, and of course we also talked about training for your ride, and there was a lot of talking about that, so I'm curious what you all think about that. Feel free to chime in over at the blog and social, things like that. Love to hear from you. Email. I have email, pedalshift@pedalshift.net if I recall correctly. Or, of course, the voicemail hotline, which is, I have it right here, 202-930-1109. Someday I'll actually play some of these for you because they're actually kind of fun. All right, I'm hoping everybody's hearing from me. Thomas Beninati joining as well. We've got starting to get a little bit of a what do you call it? A critical mass. A critical mass. That is a bicycling term, I think, in some ways, here in the room. So we'll get started in a little bit. I am in the condo here in Washington, D.C., as I mentioned. Different location than the last time. I'm noticing I have shadows on the refrigerator. Not high quality video work, but you know, this is what you're stuck with for the live show here. We'll be drinking tonight because I've had a day. I spent 3 consecutive hours on the telephone with clients earlier, and it's fine, great stuff, but that's a lot of time to be on the phone, engaged, before you do an hour-long live show. That's all I'm saying. Not recommended. Today's beer is Hop Bullet Double IPA from Sierra Nevada. I was actually quite surprised by it. It's very delicious. I recommend it. I keep it in my more legit, more cool South Street Brewery out of Charlottesville, Virginia. That's my cozy. It's a good place. They have good beer there. Recommend it if you're in the Charlottesville area. All right. So once again, check out the tour journal offerings. Of course, we had the episode 9 of Tour Journals came out last couple of episodes. If you're interested in supporting the show, I've got Tour Journals Volumes 1 through 8. Those are available. Help support the show. Of course, we've got the folks out there who are part of the Pedalshift Society. Some folks are in the room here. Thank you for supporting the show. Really appreciate it. Helps keep the lights on, literally and figuratively. So thanks so much for doing that. We're also, I've got bicycle touring consulting. If you're interested, as you're kind of wrapping together your ideas for rides and stuff like that, you can work with me. If you're not sick of me already, we can actually work together, Skype in person if you're local, things like that. So check that all out at pedalshift.net/plus. That's all helping support the show, and thank you all for doing that, and thank you all for being here and being a part of the live show. So without further ado, what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of a pause. Oh, one other thing. If you were with us for the live episode last time, you were present for a pug fight. Yes, an actual fight amongst pugs. I have 3 pugs here in the house, 2 of which from time to time get into what I'd like to call a scrap. They like to scrap, they like to fight. If that happens, we're going to have to call a timeout. If there's some barking, we might call a timeout because I like to call, you're watching the sausage being made, the podcast sausage being made here. So we may have to take a pause in what I'm doing so that I can either break up a pug fight, 1, or 2, pause if there's some barking and whatnot. The cat, as I spoke about in one of the promos, is safely ensconced, nowhere near here because the cat would absolutely climb up and destroy things. So Gizmo, the one you saw in maybe one of the promos, he is a known reverse sneezer. So if you hear an awful sound, that is not a bark. It's probably okay, especially if I just sort of roll with it. It's a pug thing. I won't get into it. They're brachycephalic. Okay, anyways. So here we go. Enough talk about things that are not bicycle touring. Let's get into things that are bicycle touring with episode number 114, shall we? Thank you for joining. Very excited to have you all in the house. I got Vince, I got Paul, I got Tom Beninati. Thank you all for being in the room and chiming in. Really love that. Tom Beninati, pug sous chefs. You know what? They are not helpful for anything. You know what they do have a magical ability for? Is to get caught in wires. It's remarkable. So you'll notice that one of the add-on bonuses is you're getting better audio on the video feed. I have a lav mic, and I have put the wiring well above pug level because, let me tell you, the curly tails, they have a remarkable ability to get tangled in cords, and Gizmo in particular. It's his skill. It's magical. It's absolutely magical. Hillbilly Seek, my friend here from YouTube, hello, sir. I hope this doesn't turn into an episode of My Drunk Kitchens. It will not. I have one beer. If I get drunk on one beer, I'm doing something remarkably good or remarkably bad. I'm not sure which, but we'll be all good. Cooking demo will be on the second half of the show. Whether or not that ends up in the live show of the podcast, I have no idea yet, but we'll just have to see how it goes. But we're 10 minutes in, and we got, I think, a critical mass here, so let's get going with the pod. Thank you again so much for joining. Be a little bit of a pause. Again, I'm going to be giving a little bit of attention to my show notes. I apologize for not necessarily always being engaged directly with you, but we're going to give it a shot. So here we go. A little bit of a pause before we get into episode number 114, intros and all, sausage making for podcasts. You shouldn't have to see this. Oh, by the way, I'm recording on this guy right here, so we'll see. Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are at pedalshift.net/114, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net, and you can call the voicemail hotline 202-930-1109. You can check Pedalshift out also on all the socials as well. Welcome everybody, whether you are live here on YouTube or if you are joining us after the fact. This is Tim Mooney. I'm very excited to be back again for a second live show and also for episode 114 of the Pedalshift Project. On this episode, I'll be unveiling two things. Number one, I'll be doing the unveiling of my May tour, which I'm super excited about. I've kept it a secret up until now. A few people had some guesses, but we're going to reveal what it is. It's new to me, which is, I think, one of my more exciting elements of the whole is that it's going to be brand new to me, so it's going to be really great. Also, we're going to be doing, at least here on YouTube, and we're going to try to make it a part of the audio pod as well. So I've talked about it before, freezer bag cooking. It's a way to kind of shorten mealtime, save some fuel and things like that. So we're going to try to make this audio environment work. Although those of you who are in the room here, we can do the video as well. So that's going to be a little bit of a demo. I've already fired up the stove in the pre-show. It's very exciting. It's probably not a great idea to do that, but we're going to do it. We're going to do it. So let's get with the journal. You'll notice that I'm pausing here, right? Because I paused because I put in sound effects afterwards. Again, more sausage making in the podcast world. You don't need to see this, but live show. The journal, of course, is where we talk about touring, my tours, your tours. I'm super excited to unveil my May tour. And of course, I'm shifting my show notes up here. Again, I just told the people in the live feed that this is sausage making, and it totally is because I have to shift my my show notes up. Why don't I just come out and say it? I am going to be doing the Katy Trail in the state of Missouri in May, the middle of May, for a little bit over a week, and I'm really, really stoked to get there. This is the first time that I've ever done it. It is, if you're uninitiated in the world of bike touring, at least here in the United States, it's often mentioned with some of the routes that I really, really like and have done multiple times, as many of you have known. Of course, in my backyard, literally 2 miles this direction as I gesture in this audio medium for those of you on the pod, is the C&O towpath. And that is so great. It's got free camping. In fact, I'm going to be going there tomorrow just to do a little bit of an overnight shakedown. But I'm quite used to it, but I never get sick of it. The Katy Trail is mentioned favorably along with the Great Allegheny Passage. It's probably a little bit more akin to that. It's a converted rail trail, as is the Gap. And I've been drawn to it. I don't have many connections with the state of Missouri, but when I've gone there, I've really enjoyed it. So I'm super stoked to be going there and trying it all out. And we're going to talk about it in the basic overview of my plans. I've got some other really cool things that are a part of the overall tour itself that I'm really excited to share. Of course, this is just going to be the preview episode. There'll be more about the planning and then, of course, the execution of it in later episodes of the pod as we go along. So let's get into it a little bit. First of all, the Katy Trail, as I mentioned, it almost completely crosses the state of Missouri, another M state, but very different, Missouri. It is very highly regarded, and lots of people do it. The one challenge with the Katy Trail that I've always found is, I'm nowhere near it. I tend to be sort of a bi-coastal kind of guy. I tend to be either here on the East Coast or I tend to be on the West Coast, especially with my bicycle touring. And that's what has always kind of prevented me from really getting into the Katy Trail up till now. Well, I just had to make a special trip for it. So I'm excited about that. The other thing is weather. It's no secret. I actually talked about it on the pod that released this morning, episode number 113. And I talked about it, I think, every episode that I ever put out. I am not a hot weather guy. And Missouri is amazing at the hot. It is so good at the hot. It is good at the hot and the humid, the two things that I don't tend to like together. Why do I live in the swamps of DC? I have no idea, but here I am. So as a result, it's hard to do it unless you pick the right time. It means your early spring, it means but not too early, or it means your fall. And falls are so great here in the Northeast that I always have a hard time leaving it. Also tends to be a little bit on the busy side for me. I have a harder time getting away for a tour until later in the fall, and sometimes that's too late for that area. Your mileage may vary, everyone's does, but it's always difficult to me to kind of do the travel with the time of it. This year was the year to actually pull it off. I had some time here in the middle of May, as it turns out, and that's a really good time to get out there and do the Katy Trail because the weather is pretty good, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Few of the details before we kind of get into it a little bit. Number one, how am I going to get there? One of the challenges is it's not exactly a clean start in Kansas City or St. Louis. You can get there from the airports to the trailheads, but it's not that great. What is great, though, is the Amtrak connections. So me, the person with a lot of Amtrak points and maybe not a ton of money to spend on flights and other things, decided to blow a bunch of those points on overnight trains in both directions and throughout the state of Missouri. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. The other thing that it's exciting about that is there is actually now roll-on service from DC all the way to my destination in Missouri, and I'll get to that in a second. And also in the connecting trains that I've got as well. So that's really great, and I'm excited to test that, pardon me, a little bit more fully than I have on the DC, the Capital Limited. So let's talk a little bit about that. Amtrak runs two trains that are going to connect me. I don't remember the name of the second one, but the first one I'm very familiar with, and that's the Capital Limited. But rather than getting off in any of the C&O destinations, whether that's Harper's Ferry or Cumberland or any of those places, I'm going to go all the way to the end of the line. Of course, that's an overnight train, and I had enough Amtrak points to blow on the fancy sleeper car, so I'm super excited to have that. But most importantly, I'll be able to roll the bike along and check it directly with the folks there. In fact, if it runs the same way as it has in the last couple of years since they implemented roll-on service, I'll be actually putting on the bike itself. Now, interestingly, they do allow, or they have allowed, me to keep my panniers in with the bike, but because I'm going to be overnight, I may actually take those with me inside my sleeper car, or my sleeper room, my roomette, as it were, as they call it. So that's pretty exciting. I'll be taking that all the way to Chicago. I've got enough of a layover in Chicago to make things interesting. I've got an old high school friend who I'm hoping to see either that morning or that afternoon. The one thing I will say about Amtrak is connection times are long and layovers are long for a reason, because very often there are going to be delays of multiple hours. So I've got that kind of baked into the cake. In fact, they do too. The connecting train that takes you, I think it's the Missouri River Runner, it might be called, unless that's maybe the inside the state of Missouri one. But I'm going to be taking the train from there later that afternoon, the next day, and taking that to Kansas City and getting there late that night. That's sort of the main travel part of that. I'll have the sleeper car accommodations for the DC to Kansas City part. I'll have just a regular seat from Chicago to Kansas City. They call it that. It's the seat. Yeah, no, they don't call it that. Anyways, then I'll be overnighting there. I've got an Airbnb rental there, kind of an interesting one I'm excited to be doing. Luckily, it's late check-in are available because they have like kind of the key box for this particular accommodation. I found that hotels in downtown Kansas City were downtown hotels, a little bit higher price than I wanted to pay necessarily. Also, you know, they're not really always great with bikes. They were also a little bit further away from the train station than I would have liked. This Airbnb is about a mile away. So even though I'll be getting in around 10 p.m., 10:30 p.m., it's going to be a quick and easy ride. And in some ways, a late night ride in a downtown area is a lot easier because the traffic is much lower than at other times. So I'm totally fine with all of that. Of course, Kansas City, like many other large cities, has great bike lanes. So I'll be taking advantage of those to get to my Airbnb that night. I'll be taking a train the next morning. So I get in late, ride from the train station to my Airbnb, sleep, get up early in the morning because it's an early morning train, ride all the way back, that whole mile, back to the train station. You can see why being close to the train station is kind of an important thing. And then I will be taking the train to, please forgive me, Missourians, if I mispronounce names of your cities. It is just because I'm a terrible pronunciator of city names, as everybody from the Pacific Northwest learned in the last couple of episodes. Sedalia, I think it's Sedalia, Missouri. I'll be going there. That is the closest city, town, whatever, with an Amtrak station next to the trail, the Katy Trail. It's very close. It's right there on the western end. And so I'll be going west to east. Well, not quite. Because I'm a completist, or a new completist, I decided that I wanted to at least start on one end of it, even if I couldn't finish on the other end. And we'll get to all of that in a little bit. So I'm going to be riding from Sedalia back west to the western terminus in the town of Clinton, Missouri. The other great thing about Clinton is that I hear it's one of the best of the trail towns. There's a good kind of Chamber of Commerce or some other type of area that's also very good for camping as well. We're going to get into the camping in a couple minutes here. But that's going to be how I backtrack. And then I'm going to be working my way all the way east, nearly to the end eastern terminus. And the only reason why I'm not is because of just the nature of where the city and where the best access is to the Amtrak station. So I'll get to that in a little bit, but I'll be riding almost the entire, I'm going to be double backing I think it's about 35 miles of it. So I'll be riding distance wise, I think more than the full length of it. Plus there's always little side trips and things like that. Again, I'll be getting into that as well. Highlights, I mean, I think that there's a bunch of them. Clinton, I hear, is really great. Really excited about Jefferson City. For those of you who, I think I've talked about this, I used to teach law for a nonprofit years ago. One of my favorite trips was, I went to a lot of capital cities because I taught to a lot of nonprofits that were active advocates within different cities, different state capitals. And Jefferson City was, wow, it was hard to get to. And you've got, on both ends of the state of Missouri, you've got two big major metropolitan areas, and you tend to fly into one and you drive, or well, I drove to Jefferson City. So it was a little tricky to get to. And so I'm really kind of psyched to go back there. But I'm particularly excited because there's a great looking brewery that's built into an old jail, which for some reason, those are the best breweries. There's one in, I think on the Oregon coast that I went to. I can't remember, name of the town, name of the brewery escapes me, but I really kind of dug it. It was kind of fun and cool. So I'm excited to go there. It gets great reviews. Also, the campsite is on the other side of the Missouri River, so it has a view of the state capitol, which I just think is kind of cool. I'm super excited to go to Jefferson City. There's a ton of breweries and a ton of wineries along the trail. So, you know, while I'm sitting here with my hot bullet here, for those of you who are listening to the show, you did not hear me introduce that I'm drinking a Sierra Nevada double IPA right here for the show. I kind of like to end my days around a brewery. There's some wineries as well, which I'm not a wine aficionado so much, but I don't mind drinking it from time to time. So I'm kind of excited to explore all of those types of things, along with the culture and the history along the Katy Trail as well. I've got a short day in there as well, and it was, oh, Tom Beninati chimes in. Thank you very much. In Seaside, Oregon. Tom, if you remember the name of that brewery, I would love to give them a plug, because they were kind of a cool place. It was built in an old jail. It wasn't Seaside. But getting back, I've got a short day also in there that gives me a chance to sort of enjoy the ride a little bit more. It's only a 10-mile ride, and it's around a town where I believe there's both a brewery and a winery. So I'm going to try to explore that part of central Missouri a little bit more by taking a shorter day, not a 0-mile day, but a pretty short day as we go along there. So I'm kind of excited about that. Like I said, I'm not going to be completing the trail fully to the east. I'm going to be ending in St. Charles, which is a town that allows for a reasonable bike ride to the town of Kirkwood, which is the site of a pretty easy to get to Amtrak train. I believe that's the Missouri River Runner as well. Tom forgets the name of the, if only we're connected to the internet and could figure out what the name of the Seaside, Oregon brewery is. Perhaps we will figure that out, but I'll put it in the show notes at the very least for sure. So in Kirkwood, there's an Amtrak station. There is one in St. Louis as well. Unfortunately, and my intention was that I would take the train back from St. Louis back to DC in some way, shape, or form. But the train that goes from St. Louis to Chicago does not have roll-on bike service. Amtrak is trying to do that for all of its long-distance trains, but that line has yet to have it, or at least it didn't when I was booking this trip. So I have to go all the way back to Kansas City if I want to maintain the status of roll-on service for all of it, which I do. So I'm going to be taking the train from Kirkwood back west to Kansas City, overnighting in Kansas City, and then reversing course and doing the same lines all the way back. Largely because I don't want to check the bike. I don't want to have the hassle of putting it in a bike box and all of those other things. I've done it before on Amtrak. It's easy. They're very good with it, in my experience. I just don't want to be bothered with it. I want to support the lines that have the roll-on service because I'd like to see more of it throughout the states and elsewhere as well. So that's that. I'll be coming back to DC. Another early morning train out of Kansas City up to Chicago. Overnight in the little roomette, little jobber from Chicago back to DC. And that's the end of the trip. It'll be a little bit over a week. Super excited about it, as you can probably tell. A lot of this is as much fun about the getting there with the Amtrak part of it as it is about the riding, but I've heard so many good things about the Kiddie Trail. It's on so many people's bucket list. Somebody said that it's on your bucket list in the chat room here, and it certainly was for me as well. I don't think I can do a podcast about bicycle touring that's primarily based here in the States and not hit the Kiddie Trail at some point, so super excited about that. Other things I'm excited about, that's what they call in the biz, a segue, kids. I'm excited the fact that it's the Kiddie Trail in the first place. As I mentioned, I can't do a podcast about bicycle touring in the United States and not do the Kiddie Trail. It's been on my list for a while, and I talked about that at the time. I'm also excited about mostly crossing a state by bicycle again. Now, of course, I did that a few years of Canal Trail. That was a true bucket list for young Tim, who grew up in Western New York, not far, a stone's throw away from the Erie Canal towpath. And, you know, it just was so good to be able to check that off of my list. And I like doing that. There's some kind of great, wonderful sense of satisfaction that you get from looking at a map and saying, I crossed that by bicycle. So that's pretty exciting. Even though it's not a complete cross, it's not a border-to-border cross, it's pretty close. So I think most Missourians agree that I am crossing their state by bicycle. At least I would hope so. Real-time follow-up, Paula Culbertson comes in the company for the jail-based brewery in Seaside, Oregon. Highly recommended. There's another one in Jefferson City. I'm super excited to be getting into that. I'm going to put that in the excited category as well. Other things I'm excited about. Hey, I found a way to make this a relaxing trip. That surprises a lot of people that I want a relaxing trip. I mean, I like the adventure of all of this. But let's be honest, doing a bicycle tour can sometimes be a little bit of a slog, and the longest day I've got is 66 miles. And for me on a trail like the Katy, 66 is pretty chill. I don't like doing mileage that's much over 70, regardless of terrain. I just don't like to be in the saddle for, you know, 10, 12 hours, if that, you know, I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but it's nice that I've got that. I've also got that short day that's not a 0 day, but it's like a 10-mile day, so I can really enjoy things. I think that's going to be really relaxing as well. I'm just excited about using Amtrak again. I love using Amtrak. I think it works a really, really great way to get there and get back. And I may have a fast forward. Depending on how things go on that final day, I may have to do a little bit of a fast forward using some local transit in St. Louis County, I think it is at that point. I'm hoping not to. I'm hoping to be able to do that full ride to get to the Amtrak station. It just kind of depends on how dodgy the roads are. I need to do a little bit more research on that. So let's see, what else we got? I got a shout out from somebody to Mysterious James. Is Mysterious James in the house? Mysterious James, please, Bretsky, watcher, viewer Bretsky, would like to give a shout out to you. If you were in the house, give a shout out, sir. Mysterious James almost was going to join me for this, but unfortunately, timing didn't work out. I'm hoping to do another tour with him, probably on the West Coast later this year. For all you Mysterious James heads out there. Let's see. Last but not least, in terms of excitement. Hey, I'm excited to get another larger tour, like a week-long plus tour in this early in the season. Normally, my second tour that's on the week-long tip is usually kind of later in the summer almost. And it's kind of exciting to be able to have a second larger tour, especially one that's not local, that early by mid-May. That's pretty great. Normally, my first tour is sort of in the May-ish range, so that's pretty cool. It's just a shout to the fact that I've got a little bit more flexible schedule these days, so that's kind of cool. Challenges. Nothing overwhelming. I haven't done this trail before, so to a large extent, I don't know what to expect from day to day. I mean, I think that's sort of a good thing in a lot of ways that so many people have, but so many of my tours are in places that I'm familiar with. So I think that it's good, even though it could be a little bit of a challenge, that I don't know how long it is until water. Of course, I'll have a guide and all of that other kind of stuff, but you just never know. I mean, there's a quasi-challenge element to that. I'm a bit of a planner. I've talked about that. The fact that I don't intuitively know what's next, like I do on the like I do on the West Coast. There's a small challenge to that, but in a good way. Train schedules, Amtrak. I just did a little visual shrug there for YouTube people, but for you on the pod, you didn't hear that. Or you couldn't hear that, so I just told you. Anyways, yeah, Amtrak sometimes can screw things up. I've gotten layovers that should work, but you know what? I'll let the punches if a connection doesn't happen. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. And last but not least, late arrivals in Kansas City. One of the bummers is that I've been to Kansas City before as well. I like the city quite a bit. I'm not going to get any chance to hang out there. All of my transfers are essentially with either late at night, and when I'm staying there, it's late at night with early morning departures, so I'm not going to get a chance to hang in Kansas City. So that's kind of a bit of a downside rather than a challenge, but that's sort of how it goes with this trip. Gear talk. Let's talk a little bit about the gear I'm going to bring. Since all the trains have rollerboard, I'm going to be bringing the Safari with me. I was tempted to bring the Brompton, but I think that the Katy, if it's like the Gap, would probably much prefer, or I would much prefer, a wider tired bike, a full-size bike. So we're going to go with the Safari on that. Plus, the fact that I can do the rollerboard service for pretty cheap means that transporting that bike is totally reasonable. So we're going to go with the Safari for that one, but that also means that I can go with the full pannier and dry sack setup. It's not like I'm going to travel heavy, but I'm not going to travel ultralight or anything like that. So I can bring the full coffee setup and all the types of things that I like to bring along on a bike tour. So I'm kind of excited about that. I think I've said that I'm excited about 1,000 things. I'm just noticing these things. It's like a verbal tick, but bear with me, people. Let's see what else is going on in terms of the gear. Oh, I plan on cooking a lot. Probably one of the reasons why I'm going to do the cooking demo in a little bit as well. I think it'll be pretty good. I like to cook. I like to cook when I do camping. Depending on the scenario where grocery stores are and whatnot, maybe I'll do a little bit of one of the reasons why I like bicycle touring is good in expenditure on doing a little more. It's kind of a weather. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sort of in gear and techie stuff. 282 that doesn't count Kansas fourth. When all said and done, for about a week's worth of riding, about 300 miles, which is really right in the wheelhouse. 300, 350 is really nice. It's not too much, it's not too little. You know, it's a good workout, but not crazy. It's still relaxed and enjoyable as well for someone in my shoes, especially with the Safari. I can really bang out the miles a lot easier on that compared to the Brompton, which it's fine, it works. We talked about that in the tour journals, but I think that you have to limit your expectations a little bit on the Brompton, especially on surfaces other than asphalt, I would imagine. Weather. It's likely going to be warm, but not hot. Advantage May. Thank you. The downside of May is that I may run into some showers. That is one of the wetter months, I understand, along the trail. Hopefully it won't be too bad, but we'll be making it all happen. The trail surface, the Katy Trail, I don't know how many folks in the room or who listen have ridden the Katy. Quite a few have written in over the years that I've done the pod. It's a crushed limestone surface, which is very similar to the Great Allegheny Passage as well, and parts of the Erie Canal. Reports are that it's quite good. It gets soft in wet weather. File under duh. That's just how they work. I think that there were a lot of people that were kind of saying, oh, you need to have extra wide tires and blah, blah, blah. I don't ride on skinny tires at all, so I think I'll be just fine with what I've got. I am going to be shifting over, and I think I mentioned this on a prior pod, to the Schwalbe Marathon Plus again. I think the Marathon Supremes are good tires. I just found that I got a few flats, a few punctures on them, whereas I've literally never gotten one on a Marathon Plus. So I'm going to go back to those. I think that'll be fine. It'll be good. It's not as wide of a tire the way that I've got it configured, but I think it'll be just fine for this trail. A little bit more rugged of a tire, a little bit heavier, but a little bit more rugged. Doesn't roll as well on asphalt, but I'm not going to be on asphalt all that much. So that's the trail conditions and the tires. Podcast plans. I haven't sussed it out completely, but I do think or recorded and then I recorded episodes of the Pedalshift project. So we'll kind of figure that all out, but Pedalshift Tour Journals Volume 10, the Katy Trail, is definitely happening. Stay tuned for details on how it's going to all work out. Of course, I'll be on social media, put pictures up and whatnot as well. The cell phone coverage in the great state of Missouri is apparently decent, but not full on through. So there may be dead pockets, but I find that to be the case on almost every bicycle tour that I do. So we'll see how that all goes. Anyways, that's the big reveal. The Katy Trail in May will be a Pedalshift Tour Journals Volume 10. I'm super excited to share this with you. I'm super excited to go on this. I'm excited to get on Amtrak. I'm excited for all of it. So stay tuned. We'll have more about the ride prep in a future episode. All right, for those of you who are on the live show, I'm taking a pause and drinking a little bit of beer because, as I discovered last episode, opening a beer before a podcast is not a good idea. No time to drink it. So wait for me for one moment here. Fantastic. All right. Let's see. Back to the chat room. Let's see. I think we Mark Williamson, Amtrak is a bike. Psyched about that. Let's see. Mark again. You shouldn't have said you never had a flat on your Tour Plus. The touring gods will strike you flat. You're so right. I am just straight screwed, aren't I? I mocked the gods. I mocked the bicycle touring gods. It's true. It is a fact. I have never had a flat on the Marathon Plus. And my experience, at least reading other people talking about it, is, man, those tires are just close to bulletproof. I will not try to actually shoot my tire with a firearm to test that, but pretty close, effectively, at least for punctures. All right, so the next part of the show is also going to be changing the point of view of the camera because it makes a little more sense to look down on stuff from time to time, so I may be doing that. So I thought this through a little bit. I thought through it. We're going to try. Next up on the show is the lab, and the lab is we have not done an episode with a lab segment in a very long time. I'm super stoked to bring this along. We're going to be doing a cooking demo, so if you're listening to the audio version of this and it manages to survive to be in the pod, great, awesome. It may be a little bit more visual. I'm going to try my best to make this work in the audio environment by at least describing how things are going to be going. But for those of you who are in the YouTube side of things, and of course the replays, you'll get a better look at everything. What I'm going to be talking about today is how I like to make one of my go-to meals. It's inexpensive, it's easy, and it takes advantage of a technique called freezer bag cooking, which I was introduced to by Mysterious James. There's another shout to Mysterious James. About, I think when the first year that we got into bicycle touring. What it does is it takes advantage of retained heat to be able to fully cook things without keeping them in a pot with fuel on. So it's a great way to save fuel while you're going along. And I found it to work really, really well. And it even helps you be able to cook pasta all the way through, especially small pasta like the one we're going to try here today. Yes, folks. One of my favorite meals is mac and cheese. Mac and cheese, but fancy mac and cheese. So here we go. What we're going to do is I'm going to start by adjusting the camera somewhat. So again, those of you playing the home game, I'm going to try to keep this working here. All right. All right, so the folks who are watching the home game, they're getting a modified view of my my kitchen here, and what I would say is that you've got a few things going on here. Number one, you've got your box of mac and cheese. One thing that I recommend for folks when you are going out and you go to the grocery stores and you don't want to carry the bulky stuff, what I often do is I suggest you take the box and you put the pasta inside of a quart-sized freezer bag. These are the things that you're going to be cooking in as well, and I think it works out really, really well. It gets rid of the extra bulk and the extra kind of mass. I find that works out pretty well. And then of course you've got the dry packet. You can stick that in with that as well. A lot of folks like to get the mac and cheese with the fancy creamy sauce that's already kind of creamy. I find that that's a little too much for me. I don't tend to like it all that much. So I like going with the powder, and I'll tell you why in a little bit too. Audio medium, you got to hear the pasta go into the bag. So again, the freezer bag, again, quart size, in a metric country, what they would call this, it's probably some amount of milliliters, but I am in those English units and don't know. So get it into the bag and fire up your stove. Do not burn anything down. There we go. Now, through the magic of podcasting, I'm also going to be heating up water in an alternative way, which will work a lot faster. But what I want to do is I want to show you how some other opportunities to make your powder-based cheese sauce a little bit better. Number one, I recommend a little bit of butter. Butter actually keeps, it does not need to be refrigerated. I like to get the good stuff, the good Kerrygold, the Irish butter. That works out really well for me. One other thing that has worked for me in the past as well, olive oil. Now some people are able to use packets, like the YouTube photo in ketchup sized, if you're familiar with sort of the fast food restaurants of the fine United States of America and elsewhere, it's in that. The noise you're hearing in the background is, of course, I'm heating up some water using an electric heater as well, just to kind of make this go a little bit faster. One other thing that I always recommend that you put into your mac and cheese is actual real cheese, because I think it's a good way to have some extra calories. You'll be surprised how non-caloric, I mean, it's caloric if you're sitting at home, but if you're on a big bike tour, throwing in a little bit of extra cheddar cheese in particular, it keeps pretty well. Again, if you're gonna be able to eat it in a few days, I don't worry about it. If you're more into, like, I don't know, food safety and stuff, I guess you could be. One other thing that I like to add is your albacore tuna. I tend to like to get the style that has a little bit of salt and, most importantly, olive oil, rather than the water, because then I can just dump that all in. That helps make it a little bit saucy as well. One last thing that I really like, sun-dried tomatoes. These are really great for flavor. They add a lot to it. It's pretty good. As far as spices go, I'm a real big fan of the Montreal steak seasoning. You can get that at almost any single grocery store that's out there, but I don't have any, so I'm going to be using the everything but the what is it called? Everything but the bagel sesame seasoning mix. It's sort of like an everything bagel. But that's how I like to do that. So once you get your water boiling, and I mean boiling, you want to get set up. And I suggest making or having some kind of a cozy. Now this is a neoprene bag that is meant for laptops. I've used this before. It works really well. What you want to do is you want to be able to retain the heat once the boiled water goes into the bag. So obviously this is too big for the bag itself. I also have made them from car windshield screens or from insulated bags that you can buy at the grocery store, and then I'll duct tape them together a little bit. But believe it or not, this little neoprene jobber does a really nice job. So if you're playing the home game and you're all audio, you won't be able to see this, but basically what I do is I just get it so that the bag itself is open, the pasta is in it, but it's inside the cozy. Again, this is to just retain some heat. Now, once your water is done, we're going to pretend that I actually boiled this all the way, but I actually used the home game. I used the electric kettle. So we'll use that because it was a lot faster. You really want to make sure that it's fully boiled. And then what you want to do is you pour it in to the point where it just covers it with a little bit of extra room. And I want to kind of show it for the video. You want to make sure that it covers it. And then as quickly as you can, so in other words, don't gab to podcast people, just shut the zipper of the bag. And then if you have some kind of enclosure for the cozy, do that as well. And then what you want to do is you just want to let it sit. And it's going to take a little while. Normally, when you're boiling up a bit of pasta, you're probably going to be boiling it for, oh, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes to 10 minutes. It sort of depends on what altitude you're at and how hot you're actually getting the water. When it comes to this, it's actually going to take about 15 minutes or so. Really, and you're going to really want to get in there, and you're going to want to look all the time. I would recommend that you don't do that. I'm going to move the camera up since we're kind of literally watching pasta, not boil, but like reconstitute, is probably not exciting YouTube fodder. So what I do, and I will show this for the camera, is you give it a little massage. You work it around a little bit. Yeah, maybe I can get a little audio in there. You know, you wanna let it get good and constituted. Now, the one thing that I'll say is, people have asked me, don't you worry about the fact that you're putting boiling water into plastic? I think the answer to that is, of course I worry about it. It's probably not a great idea to do all the time. The fact that I'm going to be doing this 2 nights in a row because I'm going to go out camping tomorrow and probably make the same meal, probably not a great idea. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm not super worried about it. If you are worried about it, do not do this. Do not engage in the freezer bag cooking. But let me tell you about a couple of the great benefits to it. Number 1, you are not getting your pot dirty and full of macaroni and cheese. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to have to worry about that. In fact, cleanup is done. You're only going to boil water. In fact, most of the cooking that I like to do tends to only be where I take boiling water and put it into another conveyance of sorts. That is my number 1 thing that I like to do. Number 2 is that you can eat directly from it. That is another great thing, so you don't have another dish to worry about getting all messed up. I like that a lot about freezer bag cooking. The one thing, and I've talked about this, man, this might have been one of the earliest podcasts where I talked about freezer bag cooking. It could have been in the single digits of the Pedalshift project. If you're at all interested in environmental issues, throwing away plastic is kind of a crappy thing to do. I try not to do it very often, but when I'm on tour, I also realize that there are some things that I'm going to be doing that aren't going to be consistent with the values that I have otherwise. I'm not sure if that is a really great idea, but that's just how it is. I think I've come to terms with it a little bit. Some other things that I would say about freezer bag cooking is It doesn't have to be pasta. In fact, I would say pasta is probably the hardest one to do. I've done it with larger pastas than the shells that you saw with mediocre results. The larger the thing that you're trying to reconstitute with hot water, the harder and longer it takes for it to work. So if you don't mind not quite al dente pasta, this is definitely the way to go for you. If you are you like real mushy pasta, this is definitely not the way that I would go. One other thing that I would say is if you are given all of the cons to freezer bag cooking, if you're just sort of like, yo, Tim, I am out. I don't blame you, but one thing that I would say, and I'm going to go get my pot back again, is you do not need to keep the heats on your pot the whole time that you've got the pasta in there. In fact, I think that because the often metal pots, hopefully it's all metal, I don't know if you would be using something else, they retain a lot of heat after they are fully heated. So another way to conserve fuel would be to get the water up to boiling, put in your pasta, maybe give it a stir while the heat is still on it, but turn that off and keep a lid, put a lid on top of it. It's not the same as the cozy that I demonstrated, but it's going to retain some heat, and then you don't have to keep the heat on it. That's going to be a very helpful thing. If you're doing something less than pasta, if you're doing rice, if you're doing couscous or anything like that, you really don't need to keep the heat on it. It may even cause stuff to stick to the bottom, which makes your cleanup even more nightmarish than it normally would be. So consider that. Use freezer bag cooking techniques without using freezer bags might be a good solution for you as well. Once the pasta gets more reconstituted, and I don't think I'm going to be doing the full version of the demo for you, but what I would do is I would pull it out. Well, let's just see how it looks. And then start mixing in some stuff after you drain it. What you'll find is that the water, see, that's, for those of you playing the home game, it's actually reconstituting pretty well. It definitely needs a little bit more time in there. But what I would do is I would drain that pasta water, and let's be good stewards here as well. If you are in an area where there's wildlife, you're going to want to be careful about what you do with that water. Dispose of it in a way that is consistent with sort of the area that you're in. If you're in a place with real deal wildlife that would want to come and eat you, I would definitely recommend you do this well away from where you're sleeping. That's just best practices, of course. But drain that water out. And then you're going to be starting to add some of the things that I talked about before. If you've got the cheddar cheese and you want to do that, one thing I would say is, for those of you who are watching the video, you're seeing that it's one big large chunk. You really want to do as best as you can to dice this up really small. You'll want this in as early as possible because if you want it to melt, you want it at maximum heat. The other thing that you'll want to put in, of course, is the butter or the olive oil that you've got. I usually hold off on the seasonings until the very end because sometimes a little seasoning goes a long way. And I have, from time to time, dumped in too much seasoning, and that is a real drag when things go like that. Last but not least, I would put in, if you're going to rock the tuna, if you're going to rock the sun-dried tomatoes, put those in kind of at the very end as well. Again, the more that you can maximize the heat retention in that cozy, the better for you, because then it's going to really work on getting that pasta reconstituted. So don't add this stuff in until the very end if you don't have to. For stuff that has to melt, like that cheese, you'll do that right away, right after you throw that in there, and then that will all work out really well. So again, seasoning at the very end, sort of on top of things. The one fun thing about freezer bag cooking, again, if you're down with it, using it also as your eating appliance, is what I often will do. And I wish I had a second. Oh, I can use the cheese bag, which is not a quart size, but you'll get the point. What I will often do is I will put the bag full of food, and for those of you watching, you can fold over the top of the bag and then be able to get in, and I put it inside the pot itself, and assuming that the pot is cooled down from when you boil the water. And then you can actually eat right out of it. Again, super easy cleanup. You just take care of the bag, and then if recycling is possible, which is often not, because once food touches plastic, it tends not to be a very recyclable thing, but if you can rinse it out and then recycle it, you are awesome, and you are a much better bicycle tourist than I tend to be. I often will just dispose of this in a proper garbage receptacle when I have the opportunity, but I should recycle it. I should be better. I resolve to be better. That is basically my basic kind of meal. A few other things that you may want to consider putting into your mac and cheese, your super mac, your fancy mac. I've bought canned vegetables before. You can get canned vegetables from so many places, including like gas stations and things like that. I think that often is really good. Pretend you're actually eating your greens when you're on tour. This is a really carbotastic meal, which is something that I tend to stay away from when I'm not riding. But it's easy, it's inexpensive, and it's actually kind of delicious at the end of the day. It's like a big casserole, you know? Remember those casseroles maybe your mom used to make? I don't know. Maybe your mom was a terrible cook. I do not mean to demean your mom. I'm sorry. That was wrong. Maybe your mom was a fine person who made wonderful meals, but maybe she made terrible casseroles. But anyways, my mom made great casseroles, and she was fantastic. So anyways, that's kind of freezer bag cooking. I just saw Vince LaGreco chimed in. He says, I found bags on a site called Make Your Own Gear that are bowl-shaped that make eating freezer bag meals easy and make adding the water easier too. That is really cool. I'm gonna have to check those out, Vince. Thank you very much for that. I think that the one nice thing about this technique is freezer bags are available liberally throughout the United States and around the world. Again, you don't want to get these kind of more sandwich bag style. This is what the cheese was in, the one that I demoed for you. It's too thin. Boiling water will break through this, and you do not want that. It will definitely also put bad plastic into your system. Whereas, of course, freezer bags are made of magical plastic that do not put microplastics into your body. I'm starting to talk myself out of the whole freezer bag thing. Anyways, it works really well, and I'm still here. I'm not dead yet, and it makes wonderful meals. So that is freezer bag cooking, and I'm curious if you, like Vince, have other ideas that are either aligned with freezer bag cooking or finding other ways to save on fuel when you're out there, or if you've got ideas for camp cooking. I would love to talk about that more on the pod. I've talked about it a little bit. You can see if you're watching the YouTube version, I'm pointing at my dehydrator right there. I use that quite a bit for all sorts of different meals that I will dehydrate and take with me for overnights on the C&O and things like that, because it can be really helpful. And freezer bag cooking can be really helpful with things like that. So if you've got other ideas, chime in, call the voicemail hotline, or email the show. Would love to hear from you. End of segment. I don't know why I leaned into the microphone to say that, because the microphone that you guys are listening to is right here. Hey, I think that's it. I think that's the end of the show. I'm really excited. This seemed to work out. I hope you all had some fun. Anybody want to throw some kind of Q&A here? So, Tom Beninati, pug-sized hail. I don't know where that was, but that's large. That's large hail. That's crazy large hail. Mark Williamson chimes in. There are also slow cooker bags that you could use. They don't seal, but they are probably food safe. Rolling the top would probably work to conserve heat. I think that's a really good idea. In fact, those are probably, well, they're absolutely built to handle the heat. The interesting thing is that I don't know if slow cookers ever get up to 212 Fahrenheit, which is what boiling water would be, at least at sea level. Interesting. I may look into that. I think that that's really good. The nice thing about using a Ziploc, of course, is that it does fully seal. But I bet that you could twirl it up, tie it off, and maybe have that as well. But definitely something to look into. I'm gonna do a little research, Mark. Thank you for sharing all that. I think that's really cool. Hey everybody, that was the live show, and we're closing in on an hour. I don't want to take too much of your time. Thank you so much for joining. Of course, this episode is going to be a part of episode number 114, which is going to be coming out 1 week from today as we record this. So if you're watching this on a replay, it is the 12th of April right now as I am talking to the camera right now. The 19th is when this episode will be coming out. I'm actually going to add in some other things as well, assuming it all works out, an overnight that I'm going to be doing on the C&O tomorrow. So I'm super excited to share that all with you audio style. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for chiming in on the chat and being a part of all of this. We're going to do more of these, I think. I think it all works out. I'm glad you liked the live live shows. Vince, thanks for chiming in. And we're going to try some more of these. I think I'm going to be looking maybe sometime in the June time range. I think the every other month thing seems to be working. We'll try some things out and maybe try some other techniques as well. Curious, throw me an email if there were any kind of technical bugs or issues or things like that. Let me know so I can improve on those the next time. But thanks so much for joining. Take care.